In the years following the Plains Wars against the native peoples of the United States, the national government was facing what they termed an Indian problem. There were over 300,000 natives living in America at the time. Waging wars against them was becoming too expensive. A solution came in the form of cavalry officer Richard Pratt. Pratt came to the conclusion that the best way to assimilate the natives was to remove the young from their savage environment, famously remarking, "A great general has said that the only good Indian is a dead one. In a sense, I agree with the sentiment, but only in this, that all the Indian there is in the race should be dead. Kill the Indian in him and save the man." And so, the era of the boarding school began. Indian schools of the early 20th century prevented cultural compromise between Native Americans and whites because of the school's policy of Americanization, school-sanctioned abuse of Native American students, and the forced removal of thousands of young children from their parents and cultures. The policy of Americanizing Native children was highly effective in destroying Native culture. In November of 1879, Pratt opened the Carlisle Indian Industrial School to a small class of Dakota Sioux children from the Rosebud and Pine Ridge agencies. The school became the standard for all subsequent Indian boarding schools. The first policy the school put in place was the cutting of hair, and it was one of the most traumatic events for the children. In many tribes, having one's hair cut was a sign of weakness and cowardice, so the policy took away the children's dignity. The children were also forced to adopt white names in place of the traditional names that had been given to them through ceremonies back home. The white school officials abused the Native children in many ways. Students were taught that whites were the dominant race. Columbus Day was celebrated as the day the Native American people were saved. Cultural disrespect made the students feel dirty and ashamed, which turned them away from their tribes. The actual curriculum was made up of a lot of physical labor rather than academic learning, which prevented natives from being successful outside their reservations. Many boarding schools physically punished children for speaking native languages. This led to a massive loss of language in the Native American community. The abuse by school officials instilled a fear of white people which persisted to adulthood. Many students suffered from sickness at the schools, and it was hard for children to watch their friends die. Of the 10,000 students who passed through Carlisle's doors, an estimated 300 or 400 students died while attending or soon after they were sent home. Students were also buried in unmarked graves or under the wrong name. In some cases, parents were not notified that their children had died. The Native children were distanced from any sort of familial presence while at the schools. This led to severe consequences for the Native American community. Children were taken to boarding schools at the age of 6 or older, which greatly affected their relationships with their parents and led to loneliness and fear. School matrons either neglected the students or abused them. Richard Pratt's Carlisle model had also included separating members of the same tribe from one another to cut off tribal connection, so students lacked social support as well. Many Native American children at a large number of schools were not able to speak to another member of their tribe for years. When the children grew and went back to their reservations, they did not know how to parent any children that they had. Many experts cite the school's treatment of Native children as the leading cause of the high rates of domestic violence and child neglect in Native American communities today. Former students internalized their pain as well, leading to problems with depression, suicide, and substance abuse. One of the worst effects of familial separation was the loss of culture. Because the children were so young when they were taken from their parents, they could not remember their tribal lives. They were also unable to take part in ceremonies traditionally held for young adults that would adopt them as full members of their tribe. Caught between the white culture they now distrusted and the Native culture which rejected them, the children of the boarding schools lived out the remainder of their lives in pain. The boarding school era was mostly wiped from the pages of American history. Following nationalistic movements in the 1900s, American crimes against the natives were covered up. At Carlisle, for instance, many of the original school's buildings were repurposed as dormitories for military personnel. Most of the commemorations of the school celebrated its education, rather than seeing the school for what it was. Recognizing the struggles of the children of the boarding schools can help us to understand the systemic injustice against Native Americans that persists today.